Is my screen visible?
Yes, yes.
Okay. Let me start. Uh, I will put this in the slideshow mode, and please let me know if you can see this. Is the screen visible now?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So thank you very much. So my talk will be on robotics and AI, paradigms of autonomy. So on the left, you can see a beautiful picture of a iconic building in the Indian Institute of Science. I always show this picture in all my talks, just so that those of you who have not been to the Indian Institute of Science before, would be able to look at one of the most beautiful buildings, not only in our campus, but in the city of Bengaluru and perhaps the country. This building was built more than 100 years ago and still stands tall and strong.
Sir, excuse me, sir.
Yes.
Sir, that PowerPoint is not yet open.
Ah, okay. That is what I
Only
am
the,
wondering.
only the screen is there.
Only the screen is there. So let me see how I can do this. There is something
Just
that is
double click on that PPT, sir.
just double click on the PPT, that will do.
Yeah.
Okay, let me see. Is it there?
It's coming, I think, sir. Let us wait for something.
Okay. Or let me do one thing. Let me share again.
Yeah, sir.
So let me do that. We normally use the Microsoft Teams, so I'm not too familiar with
Sir, just do
this
present
particular
now
thing.
and go to that file.
Okay, present now. So it gives me three options: your entire screen, a
Entire
window,
screen.
or a
Entire
tab.
screen, sir.
Huh? Entire screen.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, all right. And then I should go to,
That consent file, sir.
okay, so let me do that. Is this now visible?
Yeah, yeah, yes, sir. It's okay now.
Fantastic. So you see a picture on the
Yeah,
left
yes,
and the
sir.
title on the right.
It's ready now,
Thank
sir.
you so much. Thank you. That's very nice. Thank you. So we'll so what as I was saying, so on the left you see this iconic building that ISC has. It's more than 100 years old, but still looks as beautiful as it used to when it was just built. And that is a enduring uh, mark of good science that many of my colleagues in ISC do. So what I'm going to present to you is about robotics and AI and different paradigms of autonomy that this area has brought into the scientific progress in imaging. I will also have another part in this talk in which I will talk about some work that we have done very recently, which is in a problem which is very challenging and something that has tested our knowledge of the subject to a very great extent. So I'm moving to the second slide here. So first, let me start with a little bit of history. So robotics started with industrial robotics, mainly in the automotive sector. So this American engineer, George Charles DeWall Jr. in 1954 took out a patent for a pick and place robot. This was a huge machine that would travel to a distance of about anywhere between 8 feet to 20 feet and would pick up something and place it somewhere else. This particular model was very expensive to build. Even in 1960, it cost nearly 65,000 US dollar to build that system. But a company was started by this engineer, and he designed these machines, and these were taken up by some companies like Ford and GM, and these machines were put into the market at a price it costs to build them, because these companies realize that this is the way that industry is going to move. So they wanted to make these machines a part of the industrial life in the US. So these were adopted in the industry in the 1960s. So when we talk about an industrial robot of that class, what exactly is it? It's a mechanical device that is automatically controlled, versatile enough to be programmed to perform a variety of applications. It's reprogrammable with a large workspace. It has several degrees of freedom. It has the ability to use an arm with different tooling. So you can see one such industrial robot which is used nowadays, a very modern one on the right here. And at the bottom you see a car factory. This is actually Hyundai car factory where cars on assembly line are fitted with different components using these robots. So these robots are fixed on a fixed base, and they move around. Their arms are very precisely programmed so that they pick things and fix it and adjust it. So this is how cars are manufactured all over the world. There are no human beings who are doing this. This is routine work that is carried out by these manipulator robots. But modern robotics has moved beyond these industrial robots. What characterizes modern robotics now? So there are three main aspects that we should be looking at. One is that of autonomy, the second is that of intelligence, and the third, and perhaps the most fascinating one, is the cooperation between entities or in a swarm. When there is a swarm of robots, mobile robots, how do they cooperate with themselves? Let us talk about autonomy. So what is an autonomous robot? An autonomous robot is capable of carrying out their task with minimal interference from an outside agency. Should be able to take decisions within the set of decisions allowed based on information available to it. Think of Roomba, the vacuum cleaning robot. Many of you might have heard of this. It's a disc-like robot, maybe about anywhere between 10 inches to 14 inches diameter, as you see in the picture. It moves around on a floor and picks up dust from there. So this is a cleaning robot. Why is this robot important? Because it does not require human intervention. It is able to sense the dust around it and pick it up. Not only does it sense dust, it also senses any obstacles and goes around the obstacle. Finally, when it is about to run charge, it goes to a charging socket fixed on the wall at its own ground level, plugs itself into that, charges itself, and then once the charge is complete, it comes out of that, starts doing this job again and again. It has many smart features in it. For example, if it comes to the edge of a staircase, to sense and move back. If it comes to staircase which is rising in front of it, it will take it as an obstacle and avoid it. So in a way, it is also self-preserving. All this is programmed into this robot, which is in the market. You can actually buy from any intelligence. The intelligence is when you come down to the basic of it, it's the ability to reason. So taking available information, can a robot decide upon its course of action that goes beyond just the obvious available set of decisions? So can it reason and take on decisions which are not in the original set? If in human, we use intelligence in a very routine way without even thinking about it on a daily basis. Just think of yourself trying to find your way inside an unfamiliar building. you need intelligence to do that, because you need to look at the surroundings around you, use whatever you have learned earlier, and try to find your way out of that building or to a room in the building that you want to visit. In robots, there are many examples where intelligence, or in this context, artificial intelligence is used effectively. Some examples are the Siri, the Apple product, which does natural language processing. It listens to your voice commands and reacts to it. You might have heard of the Tesla cars, that is the autonomous driverless cars, which drive themselves on the road. The passenger doesn't have to do anything. There is no driver as it is. The car itself senses the environment around it and moves through the streets. There is something that many of us do, many of us use Netflix, but there is also intelligence in Netflix. In what sense? It's a content on demand service, but the Netflix also tries to understand what your tastes are and accordingly gives you suggestions which match with your tastes, which it discerns by looking at what your past choices have been. So this is also a kind of intelligence. And finally, we come to intelligent drones, which are fascinating subjects in themselves. And being from aerospace engineering department, I am interested in this intelligent drones, and you will see many of them later. Finally, we come to cooperation. We have seen cooperation in nature. We have seen in movies how lions hunt. There is a picture given right below where you see two lions are cooperating to bring down a, a buffalo. There are fish schools which move together as if they have been instructed from a higher authority, but that's not the case. They move together because they look at each other, they sense each other's presence and do things that helps the school to move in the same direction. Then we have seen bird flocks flying. In the evening, if you just stand on your terrace and look up, you see birds flying together in a particular direction and moving. They come back to it. Yes? Is there a question? Okay, all right, I'll continue. Then you see ant colonies. Have you seen ants moving on the ground? You will see how concerted or orchestrated their movement is. So all this is cooperation that we learn and see in nature. When we bring it down to engineering, let's look at the left side, then cooperation is defined as when several entities cooperate to achieve a task. So control of these entities with varying levels of autonomy to achieve this cooperation is called cooperative control. So on the left side, you see a picture where you have three agents. We call these entities as agents, which communicate with each other. So the communication is defined through these lines that join the agents. This is a very generic representation of a multi-agent system, but when we bring it to a multi-vehicle system, then the nodes are replaced by vehicles which communicate with each other and try to do things on their own. And when these vehicles are flying objects like flying vehicles, then we have a formation of flying vehicles. And those of you who have seen an aero show would have seen how aircraft fly. There are air shows which show how aircraft fly in formation, but you have to understand that there is a pilot sitting there. So the pilot is the one who looks at the sensor output, looks out of his cockpit to look at the other aircraft and takes a decision that makes the formation possible. So this is a multiple unmanned vehicle formation where the pilot is not there, but the whole operation is being done by an autopilot with smart sensing systems. When we put intelligence and robotics together, then the question that comes to us is, can intelligence be created? Can we use simple rules to give rise to seemingly intelligent behavior? So can these simple rules and their combination give this kind of behavior? What role do these ideas play in robotics? From the sensory viewpoint, processing of visual images takes center place in many artificial intelligence algorithms. We will see some of this later. So a next question that we should be asking ourselves is, when is swarm behavior seemingly intelligent? So one of the things that appears to make a system look intelligent is quick reaction to change scenario. So think of an ant colony which is inundated with water, or by sudden rise or fall of temperature, this flooding of their nest has happened. So the natural reaction for the ants is to seek alternative habitats that preserve the original conditions of survival. So the ant colony goes looking for such an habitat and occupies it. However, is it something that evolution, for example, in the first case, how did they actually come to this point where they are able to create a nest? So this happens through thousands and millions of years of evolutionary change. So adapting to this prolonged and permanent environmental changes can take a very long time for the evolutionary changes to take effect. However, the philosophy of swarm intelligence algorithm is more about quick reactions based on simple rules rather than on evolution of rules that adapt to long-term changes. So derivation of these simple rules that are directed towards making more complex applications possible is critical to swarm intelligence. What are the applications of swarm intelligence? One is a computational application where optimization algorithms are designed using artificial agents that are unconstrained by the limitations of the physical world. So you might have heard of optimization algorithms like ant colony optimization, particle swarm optimization, and so on. These are optimization routines which try to use this idea of swarm intelligence in order to search a space. However, we are in the domain of robotics. So the real world of applications are different. Real world applications use robotic agents for specific sensor based applications. So they try to implement the same algorithms, keeping in mind the constraints of the real world. So real world agents are what we will be dealing with. So there is an example here. On the left side, you see a function. This is called the peaks function. So one can use swarm intelligence algorithms in order to find out the peaks of this function. For example, here you can see that there are 3 peaks to this function. So the computational algorithm should be able to find this. On the right side, you see these 4 robots that are spread around a workspace and with obstacles which are white in nature. And these robots try to find their way around this place and avoid obstacles and carry out some task. In this particular case, they are trying to carry out a task by which they can align themselves. So this picture that you see is an experiment that we carried out in our lab several years ago. This is the start of our work on robotics and AI. Having said all that, there is a question that comes to our mind that it's a very tantalizing question, that can this intelligence be guided? For instance, can different sets of rules and combinations of these sets produce the desired mix of behavior patterns? For example, birds fly in a certain fashion to enable large flocks to stay together, find directions, and evenly distribute risk over the flock members. So this particular intelligence is inherited and instinctive. It is not something that is taught to it or trained. On the other hand, if you look at predatory falcons, these are also birds, or homing pigeons. These have been trained, and they have had their basic instincts guided by human training so that they become useful as hunters and message carriers. So this is due to training. So when we talk about whether the intelligence can be guided, we are talking about training. The intelligence that is inherited and instinctive happens over millions of years of evolution. So what can these simple rules achieve? So the magic of simple rules. Both kind of behaviors described here, one inherited and instinctive and the other inculcated through training, are obtained by adherence to simple rules. So when you bring down everything to rules, then you find that the basic rules are very simple. So can we think of a flock of miniature flying vehicles obeying simple rules, carrying vision equipment, and other means of aid to help in surveillance or for providing emergency assistance? So you can see on the right side, there is a picture of a bridge that is being inspected by drones. These drones are not only inspecting the bridge, but they are also tracking vehicles on the road. They are also flying and avoiding collision with each other. So can all this be done? So that gives rise to even more tantalizing questions. How about putting a human in the loop? Can the human guide the system? Can there be perfect synergy between the two? And then you replace the word human by AI, artificial intelligence. So how about putting a AI in the loop? Can the AI guide the system? Can there be a perfect synergy between the AI and the swarm? So what we need is a versatile brain, an intelligent decision making, an ability to react to unpredictable situations, and a physical capability that the system gives, that is flying, speed, ability to access the environment, and so on. So if you put all these together, then you have what is known as an AI-based system. So a couple of thousand years ago, the Greeks wrote theater and drama. In that, there was a concept of deus ex machina, which means that, which literally means the God in the machine. So essentially, they try to put a divine intervention at the end of the play to make everything right. So this actually happens in the right hand picture. You can see this by lowering a mechanical platform onto the stage, and there is a God who will be sitting there and who will set everything right. So this is a nice way to bring it to an end. But right now, in the context of robotics, if I can put a human or an AI in the loop, then that AI is the deus ex machina in this. So how do we analyze such systems? Can human behavior be modeled, and do we need to constrain them? So being from aerospace engineering department, I present something to you which talks about the different levels of autonomy in a UAV system. So going from the bottommost, this has been taken from the UAV roadmap that was created by the Department of Defense in the USA. So going from the bottom, I have the level 0 autonomy, which is actually not autonomous at all. It is remotely piloted. Then level 1 autonomy is remotely guided. That piloted vehicles are those which talk about every action that the vehicle takes is given by the pilot, who is standing somewhere else in a remote place. Remotely guided is when the pilot gives, let us say, the waypoints, and the UAV flies from one waypoint to another. The level 2 autonomy here is a real-time health diagnosis. So is there a sensor system inside the UAV that can look at how well the UAV is performing? That is the second level of autonomy. The third level of autonomy is to when the system is able to adapt to flight and failure conditions. If something fails, can the system recover from it? Level 4 autonomy is onboard route replan. So if there is a route given to a vehicle, can it change this route on board based on what it sees around it? The fifth level of autonomy is group coordination, and this is where we come to the swarm intelligence that we are talking about. Can the group coordinate with each other and move together? The sixth level of autonomy is group tactical replan, that can, as a group, it can replan its motion. The seventh level of autonomy is group tactical goals. Can it decide on goals on its own? The eighth level is distributed control. So can the control be given to each individual entity to do everything from level 4 to 7? Then similarly, we have the group strategic goals. So instead of a particular goal in mind, can it even decide what the goal should be? So that is a strategy. And then we come to the level 10, which is fully autonomous systems. So you may wonder, where are we in all this? If you really look at this, we have actually come up to the onboard, up to the level 3, adapt to flight and failure conditions. Research on 4 to 10 is still going on, and some success has been achieved in each of these things, but they are not completely done. So it will, according to the UAV roadmap, it will take maybe another 10 years before we can come up with this up to level 9, and maybe another 20 years before we have a fully autonomous systems. This is as far as the unmanned aerial vehicle system is concerned. Having said that, that's just a simple taste of what robotics and AI is going to do in the next few years. Now I come to a problem of interception of moving aerial targets, which is a project that we carried out in the last 2 years at the Department of Aerospace Engineering for a very particular kind of task. So I will devote the rest of the talk talking about how robotics and AI has been used to solve this interesting and challenging problem. So on the left side of the screen, you can see that there is a orange colored UAV which is flying, and there is a ball hanging from it. And there is a green colored UAV which seems to be following the ball. And the job of this green colored UAV is to grab the ball, detach it, and then take it and bring it to drop it at a certain designated place, and then itself land on another designated place. So why are we doing all this? If we look at this particular uh, challenging work, you will see that it has many elements in it which cannot be solved by traditional robotics. For instance, the green UAV must have a sensor system that will allow you to follow the ball, detect the ball and follow it, and reject all other sensors signals around it. It also has to decide how it should fly in order to look to grab this swinging ball. Then it has to design an efficient grabbing mechanism which will be able to grab the ball. So all this is written on the right side. So we have to design a grabbing mechanism, we have to design a guidance law, we have to design a system architecture for the operation of multiple UAV, because there are two UAVs. One is carrying the ball, there is another one which is trying to grab the ball. We can have more than one UAV trying to grab the ball also. Why is that? Because the orange UAV can move very fast, and quite often any one UAV will not be able to follow the ball. So since the ball is suspended below the target UAV, close proximity operations are required, which increases the complexity of the mission. There is another line here which I'm not sure if you can see. Yeah. So there is a small other problem which is associated with this particular challenge, that there are balloons which are tethered to the ground, and the UAV has to go and pop those balloons also after it has grabbed this ball. So let us see how it does this. So first we have to design the manipulator arm in such a way that it serves two purposes. One is ball grabbing, the other is balloon popping using these manipulators. So we have to design only one manipulator does that. So we have this extended manipulator here, which has a grabbing mechanism here, which can also be replaced by another mechanism. You can see it here, which can be used to pop the balloon on the ground. That is, it will have pins which will go and hit the balloon and burst it. This is the first part. Now, when we come to the vision, that is, what kind of vision are we using for doing all this, we have to have a vision-based aerial object detection. So in this picture, you see the airfield that we have in our department here. Our department is on the left side, you can see that. And on the airfield, there is a UAV which is flying, and there is a cable to which the ball is suspended. And this picture that you see is taken from another UAV which is following this ball. So you can see that in this ball, around this ball, there are two things that are identified. One is a sector-shaped area here, which is the search space for looking at the ball. Once you have defined the drone, you look below it and define a search space in which the ball should be searched for. And then you you home on to the square within which the ball should be. So as the ball moves, you follow the ball. This UAV, the chaser UAV, will follow that ball. So on the right side, you see some ideas about how this has been done. So you see the primary search region, the secondary search region. The primary is the bigger one, secondary is the smaller one, and finally there is a small circle which talks about the drone detection part. Sorry, this part shows the drone detection, but the small circle here talks about the ball detection part. Remember that all these that I'm showing you are actual experiments that were carried out. For the drone detection, we used a machine learning algorithm for this, for which you can see the architecture here. So we used a 24 convolutional layers followed by 2 fully connected layers. Alternating 1x1 convolution layers reduces the feature space from preceding layers. We pre-train the convolutional layers on an ImageNet classification task at half the resolution and then double the resolution for detection. This is to preserve the memory requirement as well as the computational requirement. So the model used is a TinyYOLO. It helps in detecting of small objects. The data sets we used are from 3 different data sets. The most important was the USC, University of Southern California dataset, which has several drones in it. The above mentioned datasets have a variety of drones at different scales, like large drones, different illuminations, and so on. So total images that we used for training our system was nearly 60,000, 58,985. That's nearly 60,000 data that we use. So some of the images that you can see here are here. So we have this small object and different illumination cases. So from our own experiment, we have done this. So there is a drone where there's a very small object, right? The drone is a very small object in the largest screen. Only when our drone comes close to this drone, we can see the bigger details of this. And you can see in this case, the sky illumination is, the background illumination is different from this case where the drone is. Similarly, when it is close to the ground or close to the trees, then the picture also changes here. So all these are challenges that have to be taken into account. So we also created data sets of our own for this because we wanted to do this for the problem that we are trying to solve. And so the data sets that were available elsewhere did not have this kind of scenario. So we created our own scenario on which we tested these drones. The next is the ball detection. Once we are done with the drone detection, we have to do the ball detection. A similar idea was used there. The ball is of a unique color. So we use that information to track it. A color segmentation for red color followed by detecting the largest contour seems to give the optimum results. The drone detection will also give us an approximate area to look for the ball, which can further increase the accuracy. This is a very important thing that we did, that it was, since we had the data set for the drones, we first detected the drone and then we came down and detected the ball against the sky. So combination of the drone and the ball will give a very good idea about what the target is. You may wonder, why don't we just go for the ball and forget the drone? You can do so, but the risk is there because there are so many other things around here which may not be exactly circular but can give false positives, and those false positives can create a lot of problems. That is, your drone, which is running in a completely autonomous mode, will start following or will get distracted by other images. But a combination of the drone and the ball below it is what makes it work well. So during the ball detection, what we have is a search phase where we start with searching the image and searching the area where the drone is detected, and we get the image of the ball. Then we do the color segmentation thresholding to identify the ball accurately. And then the image segmentation, filter, detected contour, these details I will not go through. and it continues and then tracks because the ball is moving. So our drone must be able to track it. So the detection of the drones is also a part of this. So this whole flowchart that you see here detects the drones, detects the searches for the ball, detects the ball, and then tracks it as the ball moves. So this is the whole block diagram that gives all the operations in one place. How now, as we come close to the ball, what do we do? So we have to look at the engagement geometry. The location of the target, image plane, and manipulator are given here. So this is our drone, which has this extended manipulator with the grabbing mechanism here. So as the drone follows the target, which is the drone and the ball, we must replace the grabber mechanism close to the ball. So the grabber mechanism is directed toward the ball, and for that we have to guide our drone in such a way that this extended version of the point is what should come close to the ball. So on the left side, you can see here how the target is being tracked in a simulation environment, and you can see that the LOS separation distance between the grabbing mechanism and the ball is given here. It varies. It starts from about 35 meters here, goes down and oscillates around a value of 5 meters. We actually want this distance to be about 5 meters when it is tracking the ball. So it is not trying to grab the ball yet. It is just tracking it. So you want it to be just about 5 meters away from the ball. So that is what we see here. This shows the yaw offset of the drone. After we have been able to track the ball from a close proximity, we would like to actually grab the ball, right? So this is what is done in the next one. In this case, now the drone comes close to the target and tries to grab it. So that is why now the line of sight separation distance has now gone down from 5 to 0. So this is where the grabbing actually should happen, but this is in simulation. We'll show you the experiments later. So there is a little bit of ball grabber design that we need to do, which is based on the radius of the gripper and the radius of the ball. So we use the concept from robotics called configuration space, where we reduce the target to a point and the grabbing mechanism to a small value. So the idea is that if I can bring this point within this small green circle, it means that this ball is within the gripper radius here. Now this particular target, that is the drone which is carrying the ball, is moving in a figure of 8 trajectory, and in a very fast speed. The high speed motion is there. So we would like to now intercept this at certain points. For example, suppose this is the initial position of the drone, then it starts moving towards this. So you can see that as the system is moving like this, in this part it is approaching the target. So it has estimated the target's trajectory and is approaching it, and it goes like this and grabs the target at this point. So we have to design this whole trajectory for the grabbing mechanism so that it can do so very quickly, and it is not an easy task because the target is maneuvering so fast here. So we will leave the drone grabbing the ball and go to how the drone actually detects the balloon which is tethered to the ground. You can see there is a balloon here, white balloon, which is tethered to the ground here. And how does it detect this and pops this? Pops in the sense it bursts the balloon. So this is a simpler problem in the sense that the target is not moving. So it also goes through this particular flowchart. So you use balloon vision, that is, you take a picture of the area where the balloon is, get the image, detect the balloons in that image, like what you see here, that it has been detected here. Remember that there is a balloon here and there is another balloon which is further down. and it is a smaller circle that detects that balloon because this is a smaller balloon here. So there is a filtering that is done, color segmentation, thresholding, filter detection, then fit the circles to the contours, and then estimate the position of the balloon. So depending on what is the size of the circle that you fit around it, you could estimate at what distance the balloon is. And then it goes into the balloon vision, and this process continues as the drone comes closer and closer to the balloon here. So again, just the way we did in the grabbing mechanism design, we have to design the balloon popping mechanism here, and the geometry shows the relative position of the camera, the image plane, and the target balloons. So you have the option of moving to this balloon or to this balloon, depending on what you want to do. You look at the image plane here. This balloon has a projection here. This balloon has a projection here. Depending on which one, you have to take a decision which one. You may like to move towards the one which is closer because it gives a larger projection, and then later go to the balloon which gives a smaller projection here. So you can use the size as the deciding parameter to decide which of the balloons to be popped first. Here also you design the gripper design using the same kind of idea here as before. Now going for the grabbing and popping kind of thing. So if you look at the grabbing mechanism, the target is a figure of 8 target, and we have to move the UAV in such a way that it is able to track this target and catch or grab it. So you may have a UAV moving in this direction or in this direction while looking at the balloon and then moving in to grab the balloon. In this case, you have the UAV starting from here, moving to this balloon, then doing what is known as a lawnmower search. That is an exhaustive search. Go like this, look at this balloon, go like this, look at this balloon, do this, and so on. So it keeps doing an exhaustive search up to this point, comes back to the beginning and does this again, and detects all the balloons in the arena and pops them. So the balloon popping mission can be now expressed in the form of a flow chart that you can see here. So you can start from, let us say, the exploration part of it. So if there is a detection of balloon, then you go to the next part. If it is not, then you come back to the exploration and keep exploring it. If it is detected, then go and register the UAV position at which the balloon was detected, and then proceed to pop. This is the way it works. So estimate the balloon's location, go to the UAV has crossed the balloon's location. Yes, then go to the registered location. If not, then proceed to pop, and so on. So these are very logical kind of things that you do in order to achieve this particular solution. Finally, we come to the controller design. The controller has to be adaptive. So because we need the system to behave in a certain way. So we have a reference model based on the mission requirements, and that tells you what the velocity of the drone should be. And you go to the reference model, and then you compare what is desired and what you actually achieve, and then use that error to define your desired velocity properly. Why is the actual velocity is different from the desired velocity? Because the reference model has dynamics built into it. So any of you who have done control systems would know what I'm talking about. The dynamics is the one that makes a difference between what is desired and what is achieved. For example, if you take a first order system, you know that the response changes over time, right, and finally achieves what you want to do. But that delay is very important in this case because the target is maneuvering. So if it is too much delayed, then you will not be able to catch the target, and that is where the adaptivity comes in, and you change the gains in order to make the response faster wherever it is necessary. So why are we so concerned about it? Because you can see that when the drone is moving, that is the target drone is moving in a straight line, we don't need to update the gains too much, because there is not much difference in the way the drone is moving. maneuvering. But when it is doing this circular thing here, it is maneuvering very fast. So you need the delay to be much less in this case. So that is why you have the adaptive gain there. Station, which will serve as the autonomous system UAVs. Part of it will also architecture. We cannot have drones flying all over the place and making it risky. Then there's an autopilot, the motor PWM checking for collision, because if you have two drones flying in the airspace, you don't want them to collide. There is an adaptive controller that we have talked about. The whole thing goes through a task of exploration, tracking, grabbing, balloon popping, and so on. There is a camera which the drone has, which looks into the target space with ball, balloon, and restricted boundary. So what I have talked about till now is only a very small part of whatever has gone into this operation management system architecture, to give you a flavor of the difficulty of the challenge that we have here. Now there is a information sharing network, that is a communication network, which is very important. So this is the slave node UAV1 and UAV2. There are two slave nodes, and there's a master node, which is the base station. So the information of position, velocity, task status, any special event that may occur are shared between the master and the slave nodes. Similarly, we may have a third UAV also. So in fact, the master station can handle several UAVs, but depending on if a task requires one, two, or three UAVs, this can be used. Now, why I'm giving this is that this is not just specific to this particular problem. This particular architecture is adaptable and can be used to control or give control to several UAVs that are flying in the airspace. So this is the flow of control for the complete mission. I will not go through the details of this, but this actually gives you all the tasks that needs to be carried out, and then the ball can be detected, can be grabbed, the balloon can be detected, and can be popped, and so on. So all this is put in a nutshell in this big flowchart here. Now you have seen that there are several tasks, that is tracking is there, grabbing is there, and so on. So how does this task switch from one to the other? Because it's not that there is only a single sequence of tasks that gives you a result. Quite often you will see in the simulation that I am going to show you soon that the UAV will fail to grab the ball. Then it has to start again, or another UAV must start again. So this control switches to that UAV. So the task switches. So this switching and task allocation will be given by a switching topology like this. So you can see that here we have a simulation which shows that when the target is going in a figure of 8, there are several UAVs that actually take off and try to follow the target, and they go through various tasks that they need to carry out. They fail, they again reinitialize, and finally they grab the ball. We will see that. So you see a representative trajectory of all these things happening on the left side, and on the right side you see the timeline of how this switching between tasks actually happens. So now we have a complete raw space simulation that I'm going to show you. So this is the trajectory that you can see, and this is the balloon popping mission trajectory. This is the target ball grabbing trajectory. So let me show you a simulation video. So let me please tell me if you can see this or not. So I will just go out of this presentation and I will go to the simulation video. So let me see. tell me? Is it visible?
Yes, sir, it is coming.
Okay. Does it say gazebo simulations for challenge 1 MBZRC 2020?
Yeah. Yes, sir.
Okay,
Yes,
very
sir.
good. Then I'll run it. But let me explain to you what is this challenge 1 and MBZRC. So MBZRC is one of the most tough robotics, international robotics challenge. This happened early 2020 in Abu Dhabi. So the first challenge that I just described to you was about grabbing a ball and popping of balloons. So this was the simulations that we carried out. I will show you the actual experiment also, but this is the ROS simulation. So let me start this. I will speed it up at certain points. So you can see that there is one UAV that is being used for popping, and there are several balloons. Then there's a ball grabbing, and you can see the arena here. So you can see the target drone with the ball. This one, I hope you are able to see this. There is a red ball hanging from the UAV, and this is a UAV that is tracking. It is going up and down here in this case. So you can see that, and the target drone is still here, and this UAV is still have not been able to detect. Now it has detected the ball. So from its field of view, and it will start moving in. But in the process, it loses the ball and again returns to the fallback position. Now UAV 1 detects the ball and it will start moving. In the vision, UAV 1 loses the ball and returns to the fallback position. So you can see there are so many failures. After that, UAV 2 detects the ball and it starts tracking. So you can see that is happening here. So you can see that this is now the UAV 2 is moving towards the ball here. But it moves away because the ball has moved, so it goes to the next possible approach point here. So let us see now what happens here. So now you can see that the ball is approaching here and the UAV is waiting here. It is waiting to move in. So it is now moving in to grab the ball, but it fails because the distance is not sufficient, so it again moves back. And the UAV 2 again goes back there and the target keeps moving. So let us just advance this a little more. Next time you will see that the UAV 1 also fails to grab the ball and it returns back to its own position. After some time, the UAV 2 detects the ball and it starts chasing. And it grabs the ball here. And that is how the mission is accomplished there. Okay. So this is in the ROS gazebo simulation, but we will go back to our presentation, and at the end I'll show you the experiments. So can you see the presentation now?
Sir. Yes, sir.
Okay, very good. All right. So now you look at the gazebo simulation of the actual arena where these experiments are carried out. So you can see on the left side, let me put the pointer and show you. This is where the nets are put so that the UAV does not go out of this. And here you can see the balloons tethered to the ground here. And here you can see the drone carrying the ball moving in a very fast figure-of-8 trajectory. So this is the top view of the arena, and this is the Iris drone that we use with the extended manipulator. So this is all in the ROS gazebo simulation framework. Well, before we show you the experiments, all this is not just software. Please remember that robotics is not just software. It is also a very precise hardware that we need to use. So there's a lot of work that has been done, which I'm not covering here in designing the hardware. So you have these drones. This is a DJI M600 hexacopter. There's a NVIDIA Jetson TX2 autopilot. There is a camera. and carrier Jetson 130 carrier board, and there is a camera here which we use, and so on. So this is how the UAV looks like with all its appendages. So you can see that propellers are designed in such a way that they extend in during the flight. Why do they have to do that? There is a propeller guard also. The reason is that we have a certain size restriction when we do this experiment. We can't use a very huge drone for doing all this. And then this is the extended arm which folds and unfolds doing this grabbing. So this is the grab detector, and this is the grabbing mechanism that you see here. So the grabbing mechanism design went through several evolutions. So we first started with this kind of grabbing mechanism, then we moved to a net-based grabbing mechanism which was found to be the best, and finally we homed on to the net-based thing, which went through these 3 steps. I mean, there are many steps, but 3 major steps before we got the final one here. So the grabbing mechanism has to be fixed with a certain kind of framework which we designed here. Popping mechanism has to have another different framework for doing this, and so on. This is the guard around the propeller so that the propeller doesn't get destroyed. So this is in the actual arena. You have these green balls here. You see this UAV that is flying here, and here is the UAV which is trying to approach the ball and grab it. So the ball grabbing experiment is shown here. So you have the UAV. We are showing the UAV and the target separately. The UAV detects the ball, comes closer. You can see because the ball has now become very big. That means the UAV is very close to the ball. That also you can see here, and so on. And then it grabs the ball here. This is the balloon, and the UAV approaches it and it pops it here. So finally, before I end, let me show you the actual experimental videos that we have done. So let me come out of this and show you that. Okay, so not this, sorry. This one. Can you see the screen grabbing the ball from moving drone? This video?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay. I should also point out that this work was done in collaboration with Tata Consultancy Systems, TCS. So this is a joint work done by ISC and TCS. So you can see on the left the view from the observer drone, and this is the pursuer drone taken from a third camera. So this is a drone which is now almost stationary, and we are trying to catch this. You can see the instability that has happened here, and our drone is shaking like this, but it's able to catch the second part is the tracking part. So here we have this drone which is tracking the ball here. So it is able to do so as the UAV which is carrying the ball is moving away. Our drone is tracking and following the ball. So all these are real experiments carried out in our airstrip, and remember that all these flights that you see are not remotely piloted. They are autonomous experiments where whatever is being done here, the decision is taken by the drone itself. The software is in the drone. The drone uses its own vision system, takes a decision to follow the ball in this way. So that is how it tracks. So this experiment shows that this tracking is successful. So it, as the target drone starts moving away, we have the follower drone following it. So let me jump a little so you can see the same thing happening. So the tracking part we show is working very well, and finally our drone lands and the target drone also lands next to it. Okay, now let us move on to the next video. So here we show a stationary ball being grabbed, just the way we saw there. So this is how we do this. And then we show a ball which is moving. In this case, what happened is that the ball actually fell through the net, but it was able to grab. So these are the things that we have done. Let me go back to the presentation. So these are the experiments that we have carried. We have many other videos where the experiments have been done, and we have shown how the autonomous grabbing of the ball can be done. It is not that we have solved the problem completely. We have just touched the tip of the iceberg. The actual problem is far more complicated, especially when you have targets which are moving in backgrounds that we are not familiar with, moving at speeds that are changing very fast. Then will our system work? Most probably not. We need better systems to do that. But this kind of research gives you an idea about how exciting this research can be, how difficult it can be, how challenging it can be, and how you have to move not just from, you have to not only just write codes, but you also have to design the hardware, you have to design the AI and ML system, you have to design the sensory system, you have to design how you process the output from the sensory system. Everything step by step has to be done. And this has to be repeatable. So it has to be done many times to make it repeatable. What we have shown you is only some of the experiment that we have done which has been successful, but there were hundreds others which were failures. So that is how we built the whole thing and we reached this point. And it also told us that what we have done is not sufficient. We have to do a much more design, better research to get all these things to a position where a real AI-based drone can be used for intercepting targets in the air, which is a very needed technology that we have now. So with this, I bring my talk to an end, and thank you for your patience and for listening to me for the last 45 minutes. Thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed the presentation. I'll be happy to answer questions if you have any.
Thank you, sir, for a very nice and a very useful presentation. And it is that we have 10 more minutes. If you have any doubt, you can ask. Please. This is a discussion time. We'll have 10 more minutes.
Sir. Sir.
Yes, please go ahead.
I have one doubt. How the stability is assured for this tracking?
Yes, so in this particular case, I think first we have to understand where the instability comes from. So the input to the system is very, very jittery, in the sense that since we are basing everything on our vision system, the input is not very reliable. So our system showed the ball to be at a certain point in the image frame, and because of the motion of our vehicles, the ball shifted. In the next instant, it has shifted to some other place. So essentially what happens is that our system now has to deal with these jump discontinuities. So in one of the videos, you saw that the system was wobbling a lot. That was happening precisely because of that particular thing. So what we did at that point is that we used some of the PID controller kind of ideas there to make sure that our system becomes more sluggish. So in a way, we did a indirect filtering of the system input. So that is how we were able to stabilize the system there. Any other questions?
Sir,
Yes.
yeah, actually we are doing both the simulation and then the hardware part.
Yes.
So during the simulation, we are using a number of machine learning algorithms.
Yes.
And in these machine learning algorithms, we need how long we have to do the algorithms, or how long we have to do the learning, so that what is the desired accuracy after which we can dump it into the hardware.
Yes, that's a very relevant question. So the question is that how much do we train the system, correct? So for that, we have to define certain thresholds. If our system is able to meet those thresholds, then we carry it to our hardware and test it there. Because what we get in the Ross-Gazebo simulations, we train it, then we put it in the Ross-Gazebo simulation. We may get a satisfactory accuracy there, but the real implementation will not have that accuracy. So this is a cycle that we go through several times. Now we can endlessly go on doing this, but since we had a deadline, we had to stop at some point. Now this process continued for almost 1.5 years, even when the hardware changed, the algorithm changed, but it went through that cycle several times. So it all depends on what kind of thresholds you set. And remember that the threshold that you set in the simulations will not be met in the actual experiments. So in the actual experiments, we had to do further tuning of the algorithm. And given the short time for the experiments, we are not always sure because we cannot carry out thousands of simulations in the experiment. We don't have the means of doing that. We can only run some 10 or 20 such simulations. So we'll have to see what is the false what is the false solution that we got or the solution that did not work, and we have to go back and work on it. So this is a very time-taking process, and it requires a lot of effort. In fact, I should tell you that because we were working on a deadline, we had to put floodlights in our airfield so that people could work round the clock to do this training.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Hello.
Yes, any other questions?
Hello.
Yeah, please don't go ahead.
Sir, actually, I wanted to ask in such a complex control system, tracking system, what kind of controller or processor can be used?
So we use the Jetson. We started with the Pixoc, and we changed some of the autopilots because DJI comes with its own autopilot. So many of the software that we initially developed had to be transported to this. So it all depends on what kind of components that you are using. If you have a drone that you make yourself, then you may use a autopilot that has a open source code which you can play around with. But if you are not, for example, we were pressed for time, so we had to go for a DJI drone, and that has its own autopilot. So we do not have access to it. So those are questions that depends on what kind of problems you are looking at, what kind of hardware you have access to, and so on. But depending on what mission you are trying to carry out, you would like to choose them very judiciously. We unfortunately did not have the luxury of doing that.
Okay. Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you.
I think it is the time that we have to conclude now. I request Professor Dr. Meenakshi K for the concluding remarks.
Yeah, good morning all. During the last 75 to 90 minutes, Professor Ghosh has enlightened us on the topic robotics and artificial intelligence. Sir has started with the history of industrial robotics and then explained to us the characteristics of modern robotics, how robotics and AI used in solving problems. Through examples, he has explained using that drone detecting the ball and drone popping the balloon examples, and what are the various tasks in the process and how these task allocation and task switching can be performed. And finally, he has showed everything through the simulation and explained to us what are the necessities or what are the challenges in this field of robotics and artificial intelligence. So on behalf of the coordinators, Department of Electrical Engineering, GEC Thrissur, and on behalf of the participants, I extend a sincere thanks to you, sir, for this interesting session. I also wish the coordinators for bringing in such eminent speaker as Professor Debashish Ghosh, and also looking forward for the interesting sessions to follow in the next 7 days. Thank you one and all.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure being here and I really enjoyed the talk. In fact, let me tell you, this is the first time that I have put together a presentation based on the work that we have done in the last 2 years on this particular problem. And I hope you enjoyed it. I enjoyed presenting it. And if you have any further questions on it, feel free to send me an email at any time. I'll be happy to answer your questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much.
Okay, wish you all the best.
Okay,
I will now leave and leave you to other lectures. Enjoy other lectures and enjoy the week here. Thank you. All the best. Have a great week ahead. Bye.
Bye. Bye, sir. Okay, dear participants, I had shared a Google form for making the attendance. Please do it before 10:45, and we will again join at 10:45 for our next session.